Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into presidential level communication.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is, but also super fascinating. We're looking at excerpts from a book called Hu Yan that translates to Presidential Speechwriter's Charm Expression Class.
Okay, so we're getting insights straight from the source.
Exactly. It was written by a former speechwriter for, get this, 2 South Korean presidents.
Wow. Talk about high-stakes communication.
Right. This guy was crafting words that shaped a nation's dialogue.
I can't even imagine the pressure.
And what's even crazier is that he started out super shy and absolutely terrified of public speaking.
Really? That's incredible. It gives me hope.
Me too. It just shows you communication skills can be learned. This author transformed himself into a sought-after expert.
So there's hope for all of us then.
Totally. It makes you wonder, though, what are the secrets they use in those high-pressure situations?
Right, like how do you stay calm and collected when the stakes are so high?
Well, the author actually shares this funny anecdote about trying to fix a situation for his wife.
Uh-oh, I sense a story coming.
You know how sometimes someone just needs to vent?
Oh yeah, for sure. Just let it all out.
Well, his wife was doing just that, venting about work, and he, wanting to be helpful, jumped right into problem-solving mode.
Oh no, the classic mistake. We've all been there.
I know, right? You think you're being all helpful, like the knight in shining armor.
Swooping in to save the day.
Exactly. But his wife was having none of it. She was like, are you kidding? I must be crazy to even try talking to you.
Ouch. That's gotta sting.
It's a funny story, but also such a good reminder that sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen. Not to solve, but to understand.
To just be there for someone without trying to fix everything.
Exactly. And the author really emphasizes that it's about empathetic listening. Not just hearing the words, but really turning into what the other person is feeling.
That's so important. Putting yourself in their shoes, really trying to understand their perspective.
It made me think, how often do I do that? Jump in with solutions before I truly grasp the situation.
It's so easy to do, especially when you care about the person and want to help.
And it seems like the author had to learn that lesson too. He talks about struggling to listen to his own son without interrupting.
Even though he was this communication expert, that's surprising.
Right. But he also mentions this amazing boss he had, who was a fantastic listener. And that really fostered his creativity and made him feel valued at work.
So even the experts have room to grow.
Absolutely. And sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who challenge us the most.
That's for sure. Now, speaking of challenges, let's talk about this pressure to be eloquent.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. The author actually hates being called eloquent.
Really? You'd think a presidential speechwriter would love that kind of praise.
You would, right. But he felt like it was just a way of dismissing the substance of what he was saying.
Like it was all style, no substance.
Exactly. And he mentions that former President Roh Moo-hyun disliked the term too.
So it's not just him. There's something deeper going on here.
And there's actually research to back this up. Harvard professor Amy Cuddy found that people actually find friendliness more important than perceived competence when they first meet someone.
That makes sense. You want to feel like you can connect with someone, not be intimidated by them.
Right. It reminds me of that Confucian saying, 是而不. It basically means clever words and a charming appearance are rarely signs of true virtue.
So all that smooth talk can actually be a red flag.
Sometimes, yeah, it can be a way to mask insincerity. The takeaway is that you don't have to be a master orator to be an effective communicator.
It's more about being genuine and sincere.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears for a second. How many of us struggle to say no?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm definitely guilty of that.
The author shares this cautionary tale about agreeing to be a guarantor for a relative. And this was during the IMF crisis, so the stakes were high.
Oh, I can only imagine.
He ended up almost losing his house. Seriously. That's a huge reminder that saying yes to every request can really backfire.
Big time. It was such a hard lesson that he actually created a whole system for responding to those tricky requests. And it's so practical, I think we can all benefit from it.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the system.
So first you got to ask yourself, is this even something I can do? Like, within my capacity? We often overcommit without thinking it through.
True. We want to help, but sometimes it's just not realistic.
Right. Then, if it is beyond your capacity, just say no. Be decisive about it.
No need to waffle or make excuses.
Exactly. Now, if it is something you could do, think about the person asking. Do you owe them a favor?
Will they reciprocate down the line?
Exactly. But here's the big one. If you have even the slightest feeling that you'll regret saying yes, just say no.
Don't set yourself up for resentment later on.
And even when you're declining, do it thoughtfully. Listen to the request fully, give it some consideration, and offer a reason for saying no that relates to your own circumstances, not their request. That makes sense. You're validating their request while still holding your ground.
He even suggests offering alternative solutions if you can.
Showing that you're still willing to help in some way.
Exactly. But even if you can't offer an alternative, just expressing genuine regret that you can't help can go a long way.
It shows you're not just brushing them off.
Oh, and here's an interesting tip. Don't gossip about other people's requests. Discretion is key.
Good point. It's about respecting their privacy and maintaining trust.
Now, let's move beyond the words themselves and think about what it means to communicate thoughtfully.
Okay, so it's not just about what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. The author talks about how presidential speeches often acknowledge the sacrifices of those working during holidays, like soldiers, drivers, postal workers, anyone who keeps things running while everyone else is celebrating.
That's a really nice touch. It shows that their work is appreciated, even when it's invisible to most people.
And he contrasts that with examples of disrespectful communication, like talking down to service workers or being polite in public but harsh at home.
Oh, yeah, I know the type. All smiles in front of others, but a total grump behind closed doors.
It's like their kindness is conditional.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, is it even genuine?
He also calls out those people who ask super personal questions disguised as concern.
Ugh, yes. Like they're just trying to pry into your life.
It's so intrusive.
It really highlights how a subtle shift in tone or intention can completely change the impact of our words.
He shares this heartwarming story about a street vendor who quietly helped a mother who was struggling to buy her daughter a snack. It wasn't a grand gesture or eloquent speech, but it spoke volumes about compassion and understanding.
Sometimes actions speak louder than words.
So true. Okay, are you ready to dive into a topic that can be a little uncomfortable?
Uh-oh, hit me with it.
Navigating criticism and gossip.
Oh boy, that's a minefield.
I know, right? The author starts with this story about getting called out by his best friend for complaining about a classmate who didn't help with cleaning.
Ouch. Tough love from a friend.
But sometimes we need that, right?
Totally. We can be blind to our own faults, and a good friend will call us out on our BS.
This story illustrates this idea he calls linguistic karma. You know how when you're kind and generous with your words, people tend to reciprocate?
Oh yeah, like good energy attracts good energy.
Exactly. That's linguistic karma in action. But the flip side is also true. When we spread negativity or gossip, it often comes back to bite us.
So what we put out into the world, we get back.
And the author admits he struggles with gossip too. He tries to justify it by saying he's just subtly criticizing people.
Ah, the classic downplay. We try to make our negativity more palatable.
He even observes that gossipers often lack self-confidence and are driven by comparison and jealousy.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to tear others down to make themselves feel better.
To combat this, he suggests imagining being in the same boat as the person you dislike. He tells a story about a friend who wouldn't pay for meals and how their shared investment in the stock market shifted their dynamic from negativity to camaraderie.
That's interesting. By putting yourself in their shoes, you can develop more empathy and understanding.
He then talks about idle gossip about past events and uses a quote from the 18th century Korean text Chaengu Yeongan to highlight the pitfalls of talking too much.
Gossip is so tempting, but it rarely leads to anything good.
He points out that gossip often comes from those closest to us, which makes it seem more credible.
That's true. It's easier to believe something when it comes from someone you trust.
And it can be triggered by both success and failure.
So basically, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
It's crazy, right? So what's the antidote to all this negativity?
Lay it on me.
His advice is to reflect on your actions, be grateful for what you have, consider those who might have been disadvantaged by your success, and see gossip as a signal to adjust your behavior.
It's about taking responsibility for our own actions and the energy we bring to our interactions.
He ends by sharing his own commitment to avoiding gossip, especially as he's gotten older. And he actually chooses to distance himself from people who constantly engage in it.
It's like he's creating a more positive and supportive environment for himself. I like that.
This next section is all about moving beyond titles and labels, and it made me think about how we define ourselves and how others define us.
Labels can be so limiting, can't they?
The author reflects on how our lives are marked by a series of titles and labels, from childhood to the workplace and beyond.
It's like we're constantly being categorized and put in boxes.
He talks about the shift toward more egalitarian organizational cultures, with the move away from traditional titles and the adoption of more respectful forms of address.
That's a positive development.
Yeah.
It acknowledges that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their position.
He even shares how uncomfortable he felt at first when much younger colleagues addressed him by his name.
I can imagine. It can feel awkward when those traditional hierarchies are challenged.
But he eventually came to embrace this change, and he even credits it with contributing to the success of his first book.
That's amazing. It shows that breaking down those barriers can lead to better collaboration and communication.
He connects this to the evolution of labels for older generations, noting the shift from terms like silver generation to more positive terms like new middle-aged generation.
Language is constantly evolving to reflect changing social norms.
He encourages us to consider how we want to be defined beyond our current title or label, and highlights the potential for reinvention and growth throughout life.
It's so empowering. We're not limited by our past or the labels that society places upon us.
This leads us to a concept he calls conversational distance. He draws a parallel to the physical distancing we experienced during the pandemic.
So just like we need to be mindful of physical boundaries, we also need to be aware of conversational boundaries.
Exactly. He talks about how language can both bridge and create distance, connecting people across time and space, but also leading to discomfort or relationship breakdowns if those boundaries are crossed.
It's about finding that sweet spot. Close enough to connect, but not so close that you overstep or make the other person uncomfortable.
He shares former President Kim Dae-jung's advice on maintaining a half-step distance in communication, adapting to the public's expectations and level of understanding.
So it's about meeting people where they are, not trying to force them to conform to your own perspective.
He then applies this to our everyday conversations. He encourages us to approach conversations with curiosity and avoid preconceived judgments.
It's about replacing assumptions with genuine inquiry. We can learn so much more when we listen with an open mind.
He also stresses the importance of maintaining some emotional distance within a conversation, allowing for more objectivity and increasing the chance of a positive outcome.
It's about detaching from our own emotional reactions so we can respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively.
Finally, he even talks about maintaining distance from ourselves, encouraging self-reflection and a critical assessment of our own words and actions.
That's the key to growth, isn't it? Being able to step back and see ourselves objectively.
Let's be honest, we've all had those moments where we feel like we have nothing to say. The author acknowledges that feeling of dread we get when we're in a meeting and realize we have nothing to contribute.
Oh yeah, that sinking feeling of being unprepared or out of your depth.
He offers this three-pronged approach to overcoming that conversational hurdle. First up, asking questions.
Simple, but effective. Asking questions not only shows you're engaged, but also helps you gather information and deepen your understanding.
He encourages us to be proactive, to think about what we're curious about, and even practice formulating questions beforehand.
It's like having a mental cheat sheet to keep the conversation flowing.
Next, he focuses on observation. He differentiates between description, which is just stating facts, and explanation, which is making things understandable through analogies and examples.
So it's about adding your own insights and making connections that others might not see.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that observation is the foundation for insightful explanation and ultimately for developing our own unique perspective.
It's about going beyond the superficial and digging deeper into the meaning and significance of what we observe.
Finally, he advocates for continuous learning. Read, attend lectures, engage in conversations, anything to expand our knowledge base and conversational repertoire.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to communication. The more you know, the more you have to contribute.
Now, let's talk about how to use humor to lighten things up. The author points out the distinct humor styles of Presidents Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, framing humor as a powerful communication technique.
Humor can be so disarming and help people connect on a deeper level.
He shares a bunch of anecdotes, like President Roh Moo-hyun making a self-deprecating joke about his granddaughter's looks, playing on his own appearance.
That's great. Self-deprecating humor can be so effective.
And then there's the author's own tendency towards self-aggrandizing humor, like claiming to be a best-selling author with a totally straight face.
I love that. It's so unexpected and playful.
President Roh Moo-hyun also had a knack for witty remarks. He once joked about wanting to stay in Turkey after his visit, but realizing his responsibilities as president prevented him.
A clever way to acknowledge the weight of his position while still maintaining a sense of humor.
And then there's lawyer Han Sing-hyun, who totally turned the tables on critics who said even dogs would laugh if Kim Dae-jung won the Nobel Prize.
Oh no, what did he say?
He shot back with, only humans can laugh. Think about how amazing this is that even dogs are laughing.
Wow, that's brilliant. He completely flipped the script.
Thinking about these different humor styles, it really highlights how important it is to tailor your communication to your audience.
What works for one person might fall flat with another. It's about understanding your audience and their sense of humor.
He outlines 7 key aspects to consider, like the listener's perspective, their personality, the pace of the conversation, their interests, their communication style, the priority of information, and their level of understanding.
That's a lot to consider.
It is, but he breaks it down in a way that's really helpful. He encourages us to engage with empathy, to be mindful of sensitive topics like politics and religion, and to adjust our speaking speed to match the listener's comprehension.
It's about being considerate and respectful of the other person's needs and preferences.
And he stresses the importance of finding common ground. Show interest in the listener's passions, even if they differ from your own.
Building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. He also highlights the importance of recognizing and adapting to different communication styles. Some people are talkative, others are reserved, some are more aggressive, and some are shy.
It's like a dance. You have to adjust your steps to match your partner's rhythm.
He emphasizes the importance of structuring information logically, considering the context and desired impact, similarly to his approach to writing speeches for presidents.
It's about being clear and concise, making sure your message is easy to follow.
And finally, he reminds us to adjust our language and complexity to suit the listener's age, background, and understanding.
It's about meeting them where they are and communicating in a way that's accessible and engaging.
This deep dive is already packed with so many insights. We've explored the power of listening, the importance of sincerity, the art of saying no, gracefully, thoughtful communication, navigating gossip and criticism, moving beyond titles and labels, and even humor as a communication tool.
My brain is full.
Mine too!
Yeah.
And we're just getting started.
Seriously, there's more.
Oh yeah, there's a whole other layer to this. The next section is really intriguing. The author talks about this experience he had after applying to the oil company Yukon. It completely shifted his perspective and made him hyper-aware of their gas stations everywhere.
Wait, what? That's so random.
I know, right? But it actually ties into this bigger idea about the limitations of our own experiences.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. It's like before it just wasn't on his radar, and then suddenly, boom, it's everywhere.
It's funny how that happens. You learn a new word and then you start seeing it everywhere. Or like you said, in this case, it's a company, and suddenly all their gas stations are popping out at him.
Right. And he uses this experience to highlight how limited our own experiences can be. We only see what we're focused on.
And that can lead to some serious blind spots, right? We get stuck in our own little bubbles and miss out on all these other perspectives and experiences.
Totally. He calls them our own little universes. Like we create these worlds based on what we know and what we believe.
And those universes can be pretty small if we're not careful. So how do we break out of that? How do we expand our worldview?
The author emphasizes observation and curiosity. When we approach the world with a sense of curiosity, we open ourselves up to all sorts of new possibilities.
It's like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world in a whole new light.
Exactly. And observation is how we gather the information we need to expand our understanding. It's about paying attention to the details, noticing the things we might normally overlook.
You know, what I really liked about this section was how he breaks down expressing observations into 4 stages. It's like he's giving us a roadmap for how our communication skills develop over time.
It makes it feel less overwhelming, right? Like, okay, here are the steps, let's take it one at a time.
Totally. So remind me, what are those first 2 stages again?
Okay, so the first stage is basic observation. Think of a child pointing at something and saying, look, a bird. They're simply naming what they see.
Right. And the second stage is expressing feelings and thoughts about that observation. So that bird is so beautiful, or that bird makes me feel happy.
Exactly. You're adding a personal layer to the observation. And most of us are pretty good at those first 2 stages, right?
Yeah, I think so. But where do we go from there? What are the next levels?
Well, the third stage is where things get really interesting. It's about moving beyond simply describing what you see to analyzing and interpreting it from a personal perspective.
Okay, give me an example.
So let's say you're watching a group of people interacting at a party. Instead of just saying there are people talking at a party, you might start to analyze their body language, their tone of voice, and the content of their conversation. And then you draw conclusions based on your observations. They seem to be really enjoying each other's company. Or I think there might be some tension between those two.
Ah, so it's about adding your own insights, making connections that other people might not see.
Exactly. And that's what makes your communication more insightful and engaging. You're not just stating facts, you're offering your unique perspective.
And what about that final stage? The author mentioned something about creating new worlds.
Oh, right. That fourth stage is where observation meets imagination. It's about taking what you've learned through observation and using it to create something entirely new.
So instead of just describing the world around us, we're actually using those observations to build something new.
He uses the example of novelist Kim Hoon, who takes historical diaries and transforms them into these captivating works of fiction. It's taking those observations and turning them into something truly original.
So we go from simply naming what we see to actually creating new worlds based on those observations. That's so cool.
It's a journey, for sure, and we're all at different stages along that path. But the key is to keep practicing, keep observing, and keep asking questions.
I love that. Okay, so this next section really got me thinking. It challenges the assumption that eloquence automatically equals good communication. The author makes a distinction between speaking well and communicating effectively. To be honest, I'm not sure I totally get the difference.
It's a subtle but important distinction. Think of speaking well as the technical aspects of communication, using good grammar, having a strong vocabulary, and delivering your message with confidence.
Okay, so it's like the mechanics of speaking.
Exactly. But communicating effectively goes beyond that. It's about making a genuine connection with the listener, understanding their perspective, and making sure your message is truly received and understood.
So it's not just about how you say it, it's about making sure the other person actually gets it.
It's about the impact your words have, not just the words themselves. And while listening is super important, the author argues that skillful guidance is also needed to make sure the dialogue is meaningful.
Guidance. What do you mean by that?
He uses a sports analogy that I find really helpful. Imagine a volleyball or a table tennis match. Instead of trying to win the conversation by shutting down your opponent, you're aiming to help them score points.
That's an interesting way to think about it. So instead of trying to dominate the conversation, we should be trying to keep it flowing and encourage the other person to contribute.
Yes, it's about collaboration, not competition. And he even points out that New Yorkers are masters of this, using exclamations and questions to keep the conversation going back and forth.
Ah, so it's like you're volleying the conversation back and forth, making sure it stays lively and engaging.
Exactly. And, you're not alone in feeling like you sometimes get stuck in those awkward silences. He even talks about how skilled talk show hosts like Oprah Winfrey or Yu Jae-suk are masters at eliciting conversation.
They make it look so effortless, but clearly there's a lot of skill involved in drawing people out and making them feel comfortable enough to share.
It's about creating a safe space for people to express themselves, even if they're naturally reserved or hesitant.
And that comes back to listening, right? Being fully present and engaged with the other person.
It's the foundation of good communication. And he ends this section with a quote from President Kim Dae-jung that really stuck with me. The key to communication lies not in the beauty of words, but in the heart that listens.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. It really shifts the focus from eloquence to empathy.
It's about connecting with the other person on a deeper level.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about something a little more practical. The author talks about this habit he developed of consulting the Navy-Korean dictionary before writing anything. He says he learned it from President Kim Dae-jung, who was incredibly meticulous about his word choice.
It makes sense, right? When you're in a position of power, every word you say carries weight.
He even tells a story about preparing for the Inter-Korean Summit and how even seemingly simple words like said could have different connotations depending on the context. It wasn't just about getting the meaning across, it was about conveying the right tone and nuance.
So even the smallest words can have a big impact.
He compares vocabulary to having a toolbox. The more tools you have, the better equipped you are to tackle any communication challenge.
Love that analogy. It makes building your vocabulary feel less intimidating. Like, okay, I'm just adding more tools to my arsenal.
And he gives some really practical advice for expanding our vocabulary. First, he suggests listening to and mimicking the language of skilled speakers.
It's like learning by osmosis, right? If you surround yourself with people who communicate well, You naturally start to pick up their techniques.
He also recommends developing a habit of consulting dictionaries, not just to look up new words, but to really understand their nuances and how they're used in different contexts.
It's about going deeper than just memorizing definitions. It's about understanding the subtleties of language and how to use it effectively.
And he reminds us that building a strong vocabulary is a gradual process, like the rings of a tree slowly growing over time.
It's a lifelong journey.
You know, thinking back to the author's own journey, from shy kid to presidential speechwriter, it really highlights the power of personal experience. He talks about how a publisher actually encouraged him to leverage his time in the Blue House, the South Korean presidential office, for his book.
It makes sense. People love a good story, and personal anecdotes make writing more relatable and engaging.
But he's quick to point out that it's not just about entertaining people with stories. It's about going deeper and drawing out meaningful insights from those experiences.
So it's not just about sharing what happened, it's about what you learned from it and how it shaped your perspective.
And he introduces this idea of quotation as a way to connect personal experiences to broader truths, to show how our individual stories are part of something bigger.
It's like using the words of others to amplify and validate our own experiences.
He also encourages us to actively seek out new experiences, travel, try new things, even use your imagination to explore different worlds. It's about building a bank of stories and insights that we can draw on when we communicate.
It's like you're creating a library in your mind,
Yeah.
filled with all sorts of interesting and valuable information.
And he emphasizes that all experiences, even the challenging ones, can be valuable.
Our struggles often teach us more than our successes.
Okay, here's a strategy that kind of surprised me at first, leading with the conclusion. He points out that in today's fast-paced world, people expect information to be concise and to the point.
No one has time for long-winded explanations anymore.
Right. He outlines 3 main advantages of stating your conclusion up front. First, it's efficient. It allows the listener to focus on the most important information and avoid getting bogged down in unnecessary details.
It's about respecting the listener's time and attention span.
Second, it forces the speaker to be more clear and structured in their thinking.
It's like creating a roadmap for your message. When you know where you're going, it's easier to stay on track.
And third, leading with the conclusion can actually make people listen more attentively. They've already got the main point, so they can focus on the details and how they support that conclusion.
It turns a passive listening experience into an active one.
He also notes that this approach can boost your confidence as a speaker. But he does caution against using it when you're telling a story or watching a movie where suspense is key.
Yeah, you don't want to spoil the ending.
This next one is for all those people who get nervous speaking in groups. You know those situations where you're in a meeting and everyone takes turns sharing their thoughts?
Oh yeah, I know those. They can be super intimidating.
The author describes that feeling of anxiety we all get when it's our turn to speak.
It's like stage fright, but in a conference room.
He identifies 3 main reasons for that anxiety. First, we compare ourselves to the people who spoke before us.
We always think everyone else is so eloquent and put together.
And then we feel pressure to be just as good or even better.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Second, we worry about repeating what's already been said.
It's like, oh great, now I have nothing new to add.
And the longer we wait to speak, the higher the expectations become.
It's like everyone's thinking, okay, what brilliant insight are you going to share after all that silence?
So his solution is, get this, to speak up first.
Whoa, really? That seems counterintuitive.
I know, right? But he argues that there's a kind of nothing to lose mentality when you speak first. You're setting the baseline for the conversation, so there's less pressure to outshine anyone who comes after you.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Plus, people tend to remember the first speaker, for better or for worse.
It's like you make a strong first impression, either because you said something amazing or because you were the first one to break the ice.
Okay, so this next section really resonated with me. Remember those weekly school assemblies as a kid?
Ugh, yeah. They were so long and boring.
I know, right? But the author actually makes this interesting point about the principal's speeches. He says, looking back, that all that repetition actually provided a helpful framework for delivering a consistent message.
It's funny how something that seemed so tedious as a kid can actually be valuable later in life.
Totally. And he says that later, as an adult, he realized this when he was faced with common speaking situations like self-introductions, sharing experiences, or giving toasts. Having that framework in his mind made him feel less anxious and helped him deliver a clear and concise message.
So instead of seeing repetition as a negative thing, he reframed it as a tool.
And he even shares his personal framework for self-introductions. It focuses on making a connection with the audience, expressing gratitude, and highlighting your role and potential contribution.
It's a simple but effective formula. It covers all the bases.
He encourages us to develop our own frameworks for those common situations, maybe using structures like who, what, when, where, why, how, or the conclusion first approach.
It's like having a mental checklist to make sure you hit all the key points.
But he also emphasizes the need to balance structure with originality. You don't want to sound like a robot. It's about adapting your frameworks to keep things fresh and engaging.
It's like having a recipe, but being willing to experiment with different ingredients.
Okay, ready for a little bit of a manipulative tactic. The author talks about the power of saying what people want to hear.
Ooh, that sounds juicy.
It's about understanding what motivates people and appealing to their desires and needs. And he outlines 6 types of content that generally resonate with people.
Okay, hit me with the list.
First, share novel and intriguing information. People are naturally curious and love learning new things.
It's like offering a little mental candy.
Second, focus on relatable content. Share experiences and emotions that resonate with the listener's own experiences.
It's about finding common ground and building rapport.
Third, offer genuine flattery and compliments. We all like to feel appreciated and admired.
It's a simple but effective way to make someone feel good.
Fourth, provide helpful advice or suggestions, but only when it's requested. Don't try to impose your solutions on others.
It's about respecting their autonomy and allowing them to make their own choices.
Fifth, be contextually aware. Tailor your communication to the occasion, whether it's a celebration, a time for comfort, or an apology.
It's about reading the room and understanding the emotional tone of the situation.
And finally, know when to stay silent. Sometimes the most powerful communication is no communication at all.
It's about creating space for the other person to share their thoughts and feelings without feeling pressured or judged.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing. We've gone from the importance of listening to the psychology of persuasion and everything in between.
My brain is full, but in a good way. It's so fascinating to think about all the different layers of communication.
And speaking of layers, let's revisit that story about the author almost losing his home because he agreed to be a guarantor for his relative. It really highlights how saying yes can sometimes have serious consequences.
It's a cautionary tale for sure. And it makes you realize how important it is to have a clear strategy for dealing with requests, especially when you feel pressured or obligated.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that sometimes those favors can cost you way more than you anticipated.
And not just financially, right? It can strain relationships, too.
Totally. So let's dive back into that system he created for handling requests. Remember, he starts with that basic question: is this something I'm actually capable of doing?
Yeah, it seems so simple, but it's easy to get swept up in the moment and say yes without really thinking it through.
We want to be helpful, we want to please people.
But sometimes saying no is the most helpful thing you can do, both for yourself and for the other person.
And that's his second point. If it's beyond your capacity, just decline. Be firm about it.
No waffling, no beating around the bush.
Now, the trickier part is when it's something you could do, but maybe you're not sure if you should.
That's where it gets really sticky.
That's when he says you really have to consider the person asking and the potential consequences. Like, do you owe them a favor?
Will they reciprocate down the line?
And this is key. If you have even a tiny inkling that you'll regret saying yes, just say no.
Don't set yourself up for resentment later on. It's not worth it.
And then, even when you're declining, he's all about being thoughtful. Listen to their request fully, give it some consideration, and when you explain why you're saying no, frame it in terms of your own circumstances.
So you're not saying your request is unreasonable. You're saying, I'm unable to accommodate your request right now because...
Exactly. You're acknowledging their needs while still holding your ground.
He even suggests offering alternative solutions if you can.
Like, I can't do that, but maybe I could help you with this instead.
Exactly. It shows you're still willing to be helpful, even if it's not in the way they initially expected.
And even if you can't offer an alternative, just expressing genuine regret that you can't help can make a big difference.
It shows that you care, even if you can't give them what they want.
This deep dive has been so packed with insights, I feel like I need a notebook just to keep track of it all.
I know, right? From the importance of listening to the art of persuasion and everything in between.
It's really made me think about how I communicate and the impact my words have on others.
Me too. And, the thing that keeps sticking with me is this emphasis on empathy and consideration. It's not just about the words themselves, but the intention behind them.
Like, are you speaking to connect or are you speaking to control?
Are you listening to understand or are you listening to respond?
It's so easy to get caught up in our own heads and forget that communication is a two-way street.
But when we approach it with empathy and a genuine desire to connect, it can be such a powerful tool for building relationships and creating positive change.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So, to all our listeners out there, we challenge you to take these insights and apply them to your own lives.
Pay attention to how you listen, how you speak, and the energy you bring to your interactions.
Because even the smallest changes can make a huge difference.
And remember, communication is a journey, not a destination. We're all constantly learning and growing.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.